Hey guys, tonight we step into sandals, squint against the early Roman sunlight and try not to trip over a lopsided cart full of damp sea sponges. You're a sponge merchant in the bustling city of Rome. Yes, that was a real job, and while the poets are busy writing odes and the generals are off conquering Gaul, you're up before dawn trying to sort soft from scratchy. It's still dark when you wake up. The kind of darkness that hums with dogs barking down distant alleys and neighbors grumbling about roosters. Your floor is cold, your back is sore, and your blanket smells faintly of vinegar and sea salt, a souvenir from yesterday's stock run. You groan as you sit up, already calculating whether you've got enough fresh stock to supply the bathhouses before the rush begins. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive this gig. Between the early hours, the back-breaking work, and the constant risk of being undercut by a rival peddler with slightly fluffier sponges, modern conveniences start to look like divine blessings. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. Drop that in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet hit the floor, and the first thing you do is check your storage basket. Half your sponges are damp from the humid Roman night, and one smells off. You sniff. Definitely mold. You make a note to toss that one near the fish market later, where no one will notice. Outside, the sky is starting to pale, a soft blue stretching above terracotta rooftops. The city is quiet, but not for long. Already you hear the creak of carts and the occasional clink of amphorae being loaded for the day's trade. You grab your tunic's simple linen frayed at the hem and a small waxed pouch with a few coins. You tuck a spare reed stylus behind your ear, not because you need it, but because it makes you look slightly more official. The cart waits outside your door. It's crooked, the left wheel squeaking like a mouse in distress. You sigh, hitch your donkey to the yoke, and begin loading the baskets. Softest ones first, they go to the the public bathhouses. Medium soft get sold to mid-market barbers. The rough, scratchy rejects great for scrubbing amphorae, or if someone needs to insult a relative with a passive-aggressive cleaning gift. The donkey, whom you've named Marcus Aurelius, not because he's wise, but because he's stubborn, eyes you as you pack. You toss him a bruised fig and he begrudgingly accepts it. Historians still argue whether sponge merchants like you were seen as respectable tradesmen or just barely above fishmongers in social rank. You'd say it depends who's asking and whether they're buying. You begin the slow trudge toward the forum. The cobblestones are slick from dew, and the early light reflects off roof tiles like a sleepy god blinking at the day. A group of bakers pass you with steaming baskets. You nod. They nod back. In the early hours, there's camaraderie among Rome's working class. You all know what it's like to rise before the sun just to be ignored by senators at noon. Your first stop is the small bathhouse near the Subura. It's nothing fancy, just 3 heated rooms and a plunge pool that's seen better days. But the bathmaster Titus pays in full and on time most of the time. He greets you with a grunt and a gesture toward the service door. You unload a basket of medium-sized sponges, the good ones soft but thick, the kind that say, "Yes, I'm poor, but I still deserve exfoliation." As you count them out, Titus hovers. "That one looks smaller than last week's," he mutters, eyeing a particularly shriveled piece. You resist the urge to remind him that sponges are natural, unpredictable, and not grown in size-controlled molds. Instead, you smile sweetly. The sea was feeling modest. He grunts again and scribbles your tally on a wax tablet. Transaction complete, you move on. As the sun rises higher, the streets begin to buzz. Merchants set up stalls. Fishmongers shout about mackerel so fresh it's still planning its weekend. You steer Marcus Aurelius around a beggar, a cluster of arguing poets, and a vendor selling questionable sausages. The air is thick with the scent of hot bread brine and whatever's fermenting in that suspicious corner near the tanner's. You pause at a corner fountain to splash your face. The water's cold, clear, and slightly metallic. It helps. You're awake now, shoulders warming with the work ahead. The day's just beginning and you've already sold 3 baskets. You pull your tunic straight, adjust your coin pouch, and whistle for Marcus to keep moving. He obeys slowly. But hey, that's Rome. Everything moves at its own pace, even sponges. You rattle down the Via Sacra with Marcus Aurelius pulling the cart at his preferred glacial pace. Your wheels creak in protest with each cobblestone, and the early sun reflects off rooftops like a polite slap to the eyelids. The forum is stirring. Market stalls snap open shutters, lift voices, stretch their morning yawns into sales pitches. You're headed to the heart of your empire, not to declare laws or lead legions, but to sell the empire something far more absorbent. Your next stop, the bathhouse district, specifically a grimy but popular therme, wedged between a wine shop and a scribe's stall. You squint at its entrance, peeling plaster-chipped columns, and a smell that can only be described as communal armpit, with a hint of eucalyptus. Still, business is booming. You're greeted by Gnaeus, the bathhouse assistant, who always walks like he's carrying invisible jugs of water. His tunic's stained, his sandals worn, and his attitude somewhere between exhausted and existential. "You're late," he says. "You're not." You shrug, gesture to your cart, and begin unpacking. Gnaeus inspects each sponge like he's auditioning them for a play. He picks one up, sniffs it, frowns. "It's too soft," he mutters. "You said soft last week," you remind him. "Yes, but not this soft. I don't want them to vanish mid-scrub." You blink. "It's a sponge, Gnaeus, not a ghost." Historians still argue whether Romans used sponges mostly for hygiene or ritual, but in bathhouses, they were everything. You sold them for body scrubbing, foot cleaning, and even as makeshift towels. And then there's the part most people don't want to talk about. You glance toward the latrine corridor. "Ah, yes, the tersorium." You clear your throat. "Do you need, sanitary stock, too?" Gnaeus winces. "Yeah, just the rough ones." You hand him the coarse bleached sponges tied to long sticks, of course. The Romans, for all their engineering glory, really leaned into communal bathroom culture. One stick, one sponge, multiple users. Was it sanitary? Not remotely. Did it stop them? Not at all. The sponge on a stick, Rome's version of toilet paper, was rinsed in vinegar or salt water and reused until it resembled a sad sea creature begging for retirement. You try not to think about it, you just sell the things. Still, the demand never stops. A dozen bathhouses, each needing sponges in varying grades, soft for the wealthy, medium for everyone else, scratchy for punishment or plumbing accidents. One spa even tried importing dyed sponges, convinced color therapy was a thing. That didn't last long. No one wants to scrub themselves with something purple and vaguely ominous. You reload your cart lighter now. Marcus Aurelius brays once loudly as if to say, "You dragged me here for this." You pat his side and toss him a date. Next on your route is a barber down the alley, Publius. He uses smaller sponges, prefers them dry and slightly stiff. You find him trimming a client's beard while arguing with a vendor about goat hair brushes. He waves you over. Finally, the last batch was too round. Too round. They rolled off the table. You blink. "I don't manufacture them in a geometry lab." He grunts and accepts the delivery anyway. Romans used sponges in barber shops to clean razors, dab wounds, apply scented water, and sometimes to plug the occasional nick. Nothing said affordable grooming like a slightly fishy-smelling dab to the chin. One of his clients raises an eyebrow. "You're the sponge man." You nod. The man smiles. "Tell me, do you also sell dignity?" You grin back. Sorry, fresh out, but I do have one that smells like rosemary if you want to fake it. He laughs. A real one. And just like that, another customer added to your route. You move on, weaving past merchants, avoiding piles of horse droppings, and passing a pair of laughing children rolling a hoop down the street. The morning is brighter now. The cart is half empty. Things are going well. You stop at a small fountain to splash your face again. A woman sits nearby with a basket of figs. She eyes your cart. Are those for wounds? You nod. If you press hard enough, she buys 2. Says her husband fell off a ladder. You don't ask more questions. That's the beauty of sponge selling. You touch every corner of Roman life, bath battle, beauty, bathroom. You're not glamorous, but you're essential. A passing priest gives you a wide berth. You nod respectfully. He doesn't nod back. Sponge merchants don't rate high in spiritual circles. Historians still debate whether sponges were ever blessed or cursed. Some temples insisted they had purification powers. Others banned them outright. One story tells of a sponge that was used to wipe clean a cursed tablet, only for the sponge to start smelling of sulfur forever after. Probably not true, but you don't sell that one just in case. By mid-morning, your cart's nearly empty. You find a quiet spot in the shade and sit on a stone bench. Marcus snorts and lies down in the dust. You toss him the last fig and pull a crust of bread from your pouch. It's hard as limestone, but edible. Barely. A baker nearby offers you a warm heel in exchange for a small sponge. For wiping flour from the counter, he says. You nod. Deal done. And just like that, the sponge lives another life among flour clouds and rolling pins. You lean back, bite into the bread, and listen. The city hums. Romans argue. Coins jingle. Water trickles from the fountain like lazy applause. Your muscles ache, your tunic clings, but your pouch is heavier than it was at dawn. It's not a glorious job, but it's yours. The bread sits in your stomach like a stone, satisfying if slightly too crunchy, and you brush the crumbs from your tunic as you haul yourself up from the bench. Marcus Aurelius flicks his tail, unimpressed by your rest break, and you suppose he's right. You've still got work to do. Next stop, the Phallonica. A Roman Phallonica is not, as the name might suggest, a peaceful place where quiet monks copy scrolls. No, a Phallonica is a laundry, and it smells like, well, it smells like an argument between a wet dog and a chamber pot. And yet they pay well, because your sponges, especially the rough-edged almost scraps, are perfect for scrubbing tunics, sandals, and dignity. You trudge down a back alley that becomes narrower the deeper you go. The walls close in like gossiping old women, and the air thickens with steam. A slave opens the door before you knock. His hands are pruned and red from hours in urine vats. Yes, urine. Roman laundries use fermented human urine to clean clothes. The ammonia breaks down dirt and oils. It's effective. It's also not what you'd call refreshing. You're greeted by the Phallonica supervisor, Livia, a woman who runs her staff like a legion. She short shouts like a general and carries a stick that may or may not be ceremonial. Late, she says, arms folded. You're early, you counter. She smirks. Bring them in. You unload the batch rough-pitted sponges, perfect for scrubbing tunics stained with wine sweat and whatever mystery liquid the taverna served last night. One sponge has a suspicious purple tinge. You decide not to ask. Livia inspects the goods. Smells like salt. Good. She flicks a coin into your hand and shouts at a worker to stop wringing a toga like it owes him money. You nod and step back, careful not to touch anything. Historians still argue whether laundries were viewed as essential or shameful. On one hand, they were crucial to Roman hygiene. On the other, they were loud, smelly, and full of questionable liquids. Inscriptions on laundry walls even show graffiti like, "Clean toga, clean soul, and Livia will bleach your lies." You suspect she wrote the second one herself. As you push the empty basket back onto the cart, Marcus Aurelius shifts his weight dramatically like he's been forced to carry Jupiter himself. You hand him a piece of turnip from your pouch. He sniffs it, then eats it reluctantly. He has standards. Barely. Your route now takes you south toward the merchant quarter near the Tiber. It's busier here. The streets fill with wagons, fruit stalls, noisy crows, and a man selling what he claims is authentic Egyptian sand. You pass a house where a boy plays with a wooden hoop and a woman shouts something about lentils being too watery. Roman domestic life in all its chaotic symphony. You pause outside a small shop with an awning painted in fading red stripes. A sign hangs above the door, Rufus and Sons olive oil vessels and oddities. This is where you get your vinegar. You enter to find Rufus rotund, sunburnt, and always slightly oily, pouring something into an amphora while whistling off-key. He glances up. Back again, Sponge Boy. You grin. You still trading vinegar for stock, only if I don't have to smell it first. You exchange one small sponge and receive a jug of sharp-smelling vinegar, perfect for cleaning, preserving, and selling to bathhouses that insist on disinfection. Whether or not vinegar actually helps is unclear. Historians still argue its medicinal usefulness, but in your experience, the smell alone discourages most bacteria from sticking around. Outside, the noon sun presses down harder. Shadows shorten and your tunic is sticking to your back in the least flattering way. You pour a splash of vinegar onto a rag and dab your neck. It stings, but you feel slightly more alive. A nearby merchant selling fish eyes your sponge cart. You offer him a free sample, half a sponge, really. He uses it to dab sweat from his face, nods in approval. You tell him they're also good for absorbing fish juices. He shrugs. My apron absorbs fish juice. Fair. You move on. Your next delivery is to a small apothecary tucked behind a statue of Mercury that's missing its nose. The apothecary is run by a man named Lucan, who claims he once treated a senator's rash and now considers himself Rome's leading expert in sponge alchemy. You don't ask questions, you just deliver. He buys sponges to soak and store scented oils, believing the porous nature enhances potency. You once caught him trying to sell a sponge soaked in lavender oil as a dream trap. He claims it catches nightmares. You claim he needs better hobbies. Still, he pays in full. As you reload your cart, Lucan hands you a small wrapped bundle. A gift, he says. You unwrap it later to find a sponge dyed deep blue and wrapped in ribbon. A luxury edition, he says. You have no idea who will buy it. You keep it anyway. It's afternoon now. The city pulses with movement. You pass a pair of soldiers arguing over helmet polish, a priest mumbling to himself, and a girl carrying a duck under one arm like a purse. Normal stuff. You stop for a quick sip from a public fountain shaped like a lion's head. Cold water, metallic aftertaste. You swear, the lion winks. You rest your hands on the cart and sigh. Half your delivery done. The sun halfway across the sky. Your sandals dusty, your donkey unimpressed, and your pouch only slightly fuller. It's not glory, it's not poetry, but it's sponge money. And sponge money in Rome spends just fine. You make your way toward one of the quieter districts near the Esquiline Hill, where the cobblestones give way to flatter paths, and the buildings seem to lean just a little less. It's a nicer part of town, not senator nice, but clean tunic nice. The sort of place where customers don't yell, they politely disapprove. You turn the corner and spot a familiar sign painted on a wooden shutter, a round sponge surrounded by swirls of steam and soap bubbles. You've reached Aqua Munda, a tidy bathhouse owned by two aging brothers who only ever speak in short, cryptic phrases and whose clients demand softness, not savings. You rap twice on the wooden frame and wait. The door creaks open, revealing Servius thin, nearly bald, and constantly in a state of dampness. He peers at your cart like you've brought him a basket of snakes. You're early. You're not, but you smile anyway. He beckons you inside. Aquamunda is a different kind of bathhouse. Instead of the usual clamor and damp shouting, it smells faintly of cedar and quiet wealth. Mosaic floors glisten. Steam curls gently from the caldarium. There's music playing somewhere in the background, maybe a flute or just someone with a really melodic sneeze. You unload the special sponges. These aren't your standard marketplace stock. These are the top-tier, sun-dried, sea-picked, extra fluffy smells-of-nothing variety. You even store them separately in a linen-lined basket. That's how precious they are. Servius inspects them with the delicacy of someone choosing grapes. He lifts one, squeezes, gently frowns. This one is too enthusiastic. You blink. It's a sponge, not a gladiator. He gives a non-committal grunt and eventually nods. The sale is done. Payment comes in a small pouch of coins tied with a ribbon. Classy. Historians still argue whether luxury bathhouses offered better actual hygiene or simply better vibes. Judging by the lack of yelling and the abundance of imported oil jars, you're leaning toward the latter. Back outside, the sun continues its slow descent, turning the walls of the buildings to soft gold. Your cart is lighter now, and so is your mood. You head downhill toward a more modest part of town, whistling a tuneless tune and thinking of your next favorite stop. Claudia the perfumer. Her shop is tucked between a wine merchant and a scroll vendor, both of whom seem permanently annoyed by the smell of her lavender distillations. You don't blame them, it's strong. But Claudia is a steady customer, and more importantly, she's kind. You arrive just as she's arranging her jars on a cedar shelf, her fingers stained purple from violet infusions. She waves you in with a smile that makes you forget your feet hurt. You brought the small ones, she asks, already reaching for the cloth-wrapped bundle in your cart. You nod. Extra absorbent, dried in moonlight. You made that last part up. She doesn't need to know. Claudia uses sponges not for cleaning, but for crafting, soaking them in flower oils, rolling them in fine powders, pressing scents into fabric. She once told you that the sponge is the soul of her scent. You're not sure if that's poetic or slightly unsettling. As she unwraps the bundle, she coos softly. Look at the structure on this one. It's practically lyrical. You suppress the urge to ask what lyrical sponge structure looks like. She pulls out a small coin pouch and hands it to you. I added a sprig of mint oil for your trouble, she says. Tuck it behind your ear. Smells better than donkey sweat. Marcus Aurelius snorts from outside. You grin. He disagrees. Back on the street, you breathe in the scent of crushed herbs and warmed stone. The city's rhythm is slowing slightly. Shadows stretch longer. The sounds shift from marketplace shouts to dinner preparation, from debate to laughter. A flute plays nearby. Or maybe the melodic sneezer changed locations. You've got one more delivery before sundown. A scribe named Marius, who lives near the old market square, has a strange request: sponges not for cleaning but for pressing, as in pressing ink from homemade reeds onto parchment. You're not convinced this is an effective use of a sponge, but Marius insists. You arrive to find him hunched over a scroll, squinting at a map of Gaul. He waves vaguely toward his desk, where coins lie in a neat stack. The rough ones he mutters for blots. You hand over a small batch and glance at the scroll. You planning to go there? Absolutely not. It's cold and the food's confusing. Fair. He hands you a fig. This one's soft, like your sponges used to be before inflation. You accept the fig, toss a coin back at him, just to mess with his careful stack, and leave before he can retaliate with a quote from Cicero. Back in the street, Marcus Aurelius waits patiently, chewing something that was probably once edible. You pat his side and lean against the cart, eating the figs slowly as the sky bleeds into dusk. Historians still debate how sponge merchants like you survived in such a competitive trade. There are stories of sponge rivalries, sponge sabotage, sponge inflation and deflation. One record even claims a merchant tried to patent his sponge washing method. It did not go well. You stretch, feeling the ache in your shoulders. Your day's work is nearly done. Just one last pass through the lower market to sell off any scraps. Maybe an old man will want one to scrub his sandals. Maybe a child will trade you a plum for one to soak her doll's dress. Either way, you're good with it. Because while poets and generals might get the glory, someone's got to keep the city clean, soft, and smelling faintly of vinegar and violets. Might as well be you. Evening presses in with the familiar smell of hearth smoke and sizzling garlic drifting from kitchen windows. The Roman cityscape is soft now, less bustling, more mumbling. Merchants are closing their shutters. Boys are chasing each other down alleys barefoot, and the Forum is finally exhaling after a day full of political puffery and fish guts. You steer your creaky cart through the thinning crowd, aiming for your last errand of the day, but fate, as ever, has other plans. As you round a corner by the statue of Romulus, the one that's missing a hand, and replaced it with a broomstick as a joke, you spot him. Licinius, your least favorite sponge tax inspector. He's leaned casually against a column, arms folded, chewing a fig in the smuggest manner legally allowed in a republic. You there, he calls, though he definitely knows your name. You've got a tax issue. You groan internally. Here we go again. Licinius is part of the Vectigal division, Rome's famously enthusiastic tax bureaucracy. He's particularly interested in sponge weights, which are supposed to be declared according to dry weight, not damp, and he insists you've been bending the rules. You've tried explaining that sponge absorption varies based on sea temperature and moon phases. He calls that folklore. You call it good marketing. He steps toward your cart and pokes a basket. This one looks heavier than it should. You shrug. C was generous. Licinius pulls out a stylus and wax tablet. I'm fining you. For what? For exceeding the permitted variance in organic absorption mass. That's not a law. He squints. It feels like one. Historians still argue just how detailed Roman trade regulations were. Some claim they were astonishingly precise, taxing goods down to the last plum pit. Others think it was more like Licinius' opportunistic guessing backed by sheer audacity. You protest. He offers to waive the fine in exchange for one of your luxury moon-dried sponges, the one Claudia the perfumer swooned over. You sigh, bribery wrapped in politeness, typical. Reluctantly, you hand it over. He sniffs it. Lavender. You nod, also indignation. Lovely blend. He scribbles something non-committal on his tablet and walks away, sponge in hand, probably off to impress someone who doesn't know he's allergic to lavender. You turn to Marcus Aurelius, who gives you a look that says, "Why didn't you just throw a sponge at his face?" Because, dear donkey, you're trying to stay in business. You roll onward, muttering softly about the unjust politics of cellulose. Still, you've made your rounds, most of them, and your coin pouch is heavier than it was this morning. Not dramatically so, but enough to buy dinner patch a wheel and maybe even get a new tunic that doesn't smell like brine. But just as you're about to start your walk home, you hear it. A squabble. Loud, shrill, and echoing out of the bathhouse alley like an overacted tragedy. You follow the sound and find yourself staring at a group of bathhouse workers, 3 of them gesturing wildly and shouting over one another about sponge size. Apparently 2 of them accuse the 3rd of swapping out the best quality sponges for rougher ones and pocketing the difference. There's finger-pointing, exaggerated sighs, and one dramatic claim that someone's entire back was exfoliated into oblivion. You clear your throat. All heads turn. One of them recognizes you, merchant. Tell them your best sponge is this size. He holds up a slightly crusty specimen, not the tiny pebble he gave me. You step in, partly because you want to diffuse the situation, and partly because free drama is better than dinner entertainment. You examine both sponges. One is clearly shrunken. You sniff, overcured, Probably sat too long in the vinegar solution. Left one's legitimate, you say. Right one's, well, someone's experiment gone wrong. The accused bath worker turns red. You can't prove that. No, you reply, but I can offer you all new sponges half price, and you can start fresh. No sabotage, no lawsuits, just bubbles and civility. They stare at you blinking. Finally, one nods, fine. You sell them a new batch, offloading some of your backups, and leave them grumbling but quieter. Crisis averted. Sponges restored. Humanity temporarily back in balance. Historians still argue whether sponge merchants held any real social sway. But let it be known, on this street, on this day, you stopped a minor hygiene-based civil war. The sun is low now. Buildings cast long shadows, and the streets are golden in that sleepy end-of-day kind of way. You pass a taverna where someone's playing a lyre. The notes float above the rooftops like soap bubbles refusing to pop. You decide to take the long route home. Not because you have to, because you want to. You pass the forum again, now emptied of its daytime philosophers and echoing with pigeons instead. A woman sells fried fish at a corner. You buy one and eat it slowly, its oil dripping into your palm. Tastes like it was cooked in yesterday's regrets, but it's warm. It's enough. You glance at Marcus Aurelius. He's already drifting into sleep, eyes half-closed, ears twitching at the sounds of settling stone. You smile. You've made it through another day, another round of sponge-swapping, tax-dodging, bathhouse-debating survival. It's not glamorous, it's not glorious, but it's clean. You steer the nearly empty cart through the side streets, now the heavier loads of morning long gone, and only a few ragged sponges rattling softly in the basket. The sky is turning dusky, cooler, dimmer, and touched with that burnt orange hue that always makes Rome look like a painting someone left out in the sun. You take a turn down the slope toward the riverside. The docks, a different kind of chaos, awaits here, less refined than the forum, more layered than the bathhouses. Shouts from sailors, the slap of rope on wood crates thudding onto piers. It smells like fish guts, warm wine, and ambition. This is where your sponges are born, in a sense, or at least where their story begins. You're not just a merchant, you're part of the supply chain, and occasionally part of its weirdest chapters. You make your way to a narrow stall nestled between two larger warehouses. A faded awning bears the name Flavius Spongarius, Fine Sea Sponge Dealer. The man himself is nowhere in sight. Typical. Flavius is your cousin, technically. You're not entirely sure how, but your mother always said, "We don't argue with family, especially ones who owe us money." He imports sponges from the Greek islands, dried, bundled sometimes, still crusted in salt and seaweed. Your stock often begins here. You find him haggling loudly with a sailor over what appears to be a crate full of damp loofahs, mislabeled as a medicinal wool. "I said road sponge, not rodent sponge," Flavius barks. The sailor grunts. That's how they came. Flavius turns to you. "Tell him these aren't mine." You shrug. "They smell like Neptune's disappointment." Flavius grins. "You always were a poet." You glance at the bundles behind him, some decent stuff, if a little rougher than you prefer. He notices your interest. "Need restock. Soon. Want the special batch?" You narrow your eyes. "What kind of special?" He gestures you behind the stall. There, wrapped in cloth, are a few unusually large, dark-hued sponges, thicker, denser, and definitely from deeper waters. Illegal. Only if someone asks. Historians still argue whether there was a formal sponge black market in ancient Rome. You can confirm there was, and it was operated by cousins like Flavius. You shake your head. "Not today. I'm above board this week." Suit yourself. But the senators love the deep ones. Of course they do. You trade him 2 of your lesser quality sponges for a jar of vinegar and a small tin of imported olive soap, standard barter in your world. As you head back toward your cart, you pass a group of dock workers taking turns tossing a sponge at a wine jug, betting on whether it sticks. It doesn't. They cheer anyway. One sees your cart and shouts, "Hey, got any sponges that improve aim?" You shout back, "Only if you've got wine that improves judgment." Laughter follows you down the dock. You pause by the edge of the Tiber. The river's slower now, reflecting twilight like a long piece of dark silk. You spot a small boat pushing off filled with amphorae and two yawning boys who'll spend the night rowing goods toward Ostia. One day maybe you'll send your sponges farther, Egypt, Gaul, Britannia even. For now, they live short, busy lives within the heartbeat of Rome. As you turn to leave, you notice something odd. A smaller merchant wagon nearby, half hidden behind crates, is loaded with bundles suspiciously similar to yours. Same size, same wrapping, same faint lavender smell. You approach. The merchant, a wiry man with nervous hands, sees you coming and instantly stiffens. You tilt your head. "Nice cart." He nods quickly. "Good business. People like comfort." You lift a sponge. It is yours. From last week's delivery, you know that slight tear. You tossed it out. This man is reselling your rejects. You sigh. "Friend," you say calmly, "if you're going to steal, don't steal the ones I labeled as failures." He panics. "I was told they were quality." "By who, Neptune?" You don't raise your voice. You don't need to. Just staring at him with one eyebrow slightly raised seems to do the trick. He pulls a few coins from his pouch. "Here, for the trouble." You accept them mostly for the performance value. He scurries off. Marcus Aurelius watches from the cart, unimpressed. You pat his snout. "We've been counterfeited. That means we've made it." You roll the cart back up from the docks. The incline is steeper now, your legs heavier, the sky above melting from orange to plum. You pass the same statue of Romulus now in silhouette broom hand, casting a longer shadow. By the time you reach your street, the lanterns are lit the air cooler, and the city's noise traded for the clatter of dishes and the smell of lentils. You park the cart by your doorway. Marcus Aurelius, now fully committed to dramatic exhaustion, flops down and begins snoring before you even untie the harness. You unload what's left, 2 sponges and the tin of soap, and carry them inside. Your home is small. Brick walls, a straw mattress, a cracked jar of dried figs. But it's yours. You light a small oil lamp and sit on the edge of your cot. Your knees pop. Your back complains. You stretch vaguely shaped like a poorly made mosaic and let out a long breath. One more day behind you. Sponges sold. Coins earned. Laws half obeyed, cousins tolerated. You take one sponge from the bundle, the nicer of the two, and set it near your wash basin for morning. The other you toss toward a corner. It bounces, lands near your sandals, and waits for tomorrow. Because tomorrow you'll do it all again. The next morning arrives earlier than you'd like, as always. The sky outside your window is still soft gray, the light barely stretching across the cobblestones like a lazy cat. You're not quite awake, but the sounds of the city are already stirring a cartwheel, turning unevenly on a rut, a rooster shouting about its importance, a dog barking at both. You groan and swing your feet off the bed. One lands on yesterday's sponge. Fitting. You rise, slowly wash your face with the water that's only slightly colder than dignity, and take a bite from a stale fig cake. It's chewy in the way that encourages reflection. You chew anyway. Outside, Marcus Aurelius is waiting, or more accurately standing with one back leg cocked and a look that says, "You again." You load your cart with today's fresh stock. It's market day, which means less bathhouse wholesaling and more street stall chaos. You've bundled the usual mix: standard body sponges, rough scrubbers, and a few novelty ones shaped like fish, because someone in the artisan market thought themed hygiene was a good idea. You pass your neighbor, Terentia, who's already sweeping her doorstep with more aggression than necessary. She eyes your cart and sniffs, still selling sponges. Still sweeping the same dirt, she grunts. You win this round. As you trundle toward the market square, the city begins its stretch and yawn routine. Doors creak open, bakeries exhale warm bread scent. A child runs barefoot chasing a chicken with serious vendetta energy. You pass the leather worker who always waves but never buys anything. You nod anyway. The market itself is halfway set up when you arrive. The square is a chorus of hammers, crates, arguments, and the very specific scream of someone trying to haggle a chicken down by 1 denarius. You find your corner between the candlemaker and the woman who sells decorative amulets shaped like household gods. She's rearranging her display so the god of door hinges is facing the rising sun. You don't ask. You unfold your cloth, lay out the sponges, and prepare to greet Rome's finest bargain hunters. The first customer is a man who picks up 5 sponges, squeezes each of them as if trying to divine prophecy, and then walks away without speaking. Classic. Next is a mother with 2 toddlers, one of whom grabs a sponge and declares it their new sibling. You nod solemnly. Spongia minor, a fine addition to the family. She laughs and buys 2. Historians still argue how common sponge use was in Roman homes, but in your experience the answer is everywhere. People use them for cleaning, cooking, personal grooming, wound care, wine spills, and in at least one case you know of, as a wedding gift. You're mid-sale with a man who wants a sponge strong enough to scrub a curse off when someone bumps your cart. You turn. It's Faustus. You haven't seen him in months. He was once your biggest rival back when sponge competition was a little more spirited. Rumor had it he sourced his from Etruscan springs and soaked them in goat's milk for purity. You always thought he smelled like sour yogurt. Back in the trade, you ask. He shrugs. Debt collectors are persistent. You glance at his meager stall, a few lopsided bundles, one clearly cut from a floor mat, and a placard that reads, "Artisanal wipe cushions." Catchy, you say? He frowns. People like upscale. You resist the urge to correct him, and instead offer him a half-dried sponge as a peace offering. He eyes it. You trying to poison me? Only if you eat it. He grins. Still funny. You both fall into a rhythm, not friends, but fellow survivors of the same sponge-soaked world. As the morning wears on, you watch him sell 2, then 3. You sell 7. Then 5 more. Then a woman buys one just because it's cute. You start to feel, okay. Until a customer asks the question, do you sell the emperor's kind? You blink. The emperor. You know, the imperial sponge. The golden one. The myth of the golden sponge. It began, you think, with a palace rumor, probably a joke, a whispered claim, that Nero only bathed with imported golden-threaded sponges infused with cinnamon oil and unicorn tears. And now tourists and hopeful nobles think it's a real product. No, you say, I sell the people's sponge. Very absorbent, slightly less likely to cause rebellion. They laugh. You offer them a 2-for-1 deal instead. You stretch your back as the sun climbs higher. A jug of wine is passed down the row of vendors. You take a sip. It tastes like someone described grapes near a bucket of vinegar, but it's cold. You're grateful. A small boy eyes your cart. You squat down to his level, looking for something. He points to a fish-shaped sponge. You lean in, that one secret weapon against dirt. His eyes widen. His mother chuckles and buys it. The market begins to slow in the afternoon heat. Shade stretches between tents. A musician plays a lyre badly but enthusiastically. You tally your coins satisfied. Then you hear the clatter, a commotion near Faustus's stall. You walk over. A customer is furious, claims he was sold a sponge that turned moldy overnight. Faustus protests. Words are exchanged. Voices rise. Someone mentions Neptune's curse again. You step in before things escalate. Let me see it, you say. The sponge is unfortunate. Gray at the edges, clearly overcured. You nod. Common issue. He didn't know. Here, you hand the customer a new one from your cart. He hesitates, free, for peace. He takes it and walks off, muttering. Faustus stares at you. You didn't have to do that. You shrug. I also don't have to explain mold to every angry Roman. He exhales slowly. Thanks. You nod once and return to your stall. The rest of the day flows quietly. You sell your last sponge to an old woman who doesn't speak, just nods, and leaves a coin twice the price. You pocket it silently. You pack up as the sky fades into copper. The market empties. Marcus Aurelius rouses from his nap. You pat his side and load the cart. Another day done. More sponges sold, more stories gathered, and just maybe fewer moldy curses floating through the city air. The road home is slower today, not because of weight. Your cart is lighter than ever, but because your legs are soaked in the tiredness that only comes from long, sun-drenched market days. Marcus Aurelius seems to understand. He walks a little straighter, a little less begrudgingly, as if to say, we did all right today, didn't we? You wind through familiar streets, past the olive merchant who always tries to charge you double, past the boy with the wooden top spinning it with the intensity of someone discovering gravity, past the fountain with the chipped lion's head, now spitting a thin stream of water like it's telling a secret. You almost make it home. But fate, as it so often does, intervenes in the form of a man in a toga, with a scroll under one arm and a sandal in his hand. He's standing on a crate, shouting at pigeons. You stop, not because you want to, but because you have a hunch. Sure enough, it's Decimus, the eccentric scholar who believes pigeons are messengers from the gods, and that sponges hold mystical vibrations. He spots you immediately. You there, merchant of softness, we meet again. You nod cautiously. How's the research? Progressing. I've begun recording the dreams I have, after sleeping on soaked sponges. Last night I dreamed of Saturn, and my teeth were coins. You blink. Fascinating. He climbs down from the crate and pulls a small pouch from his robe. I need more, the flatter ones, for dream stabilization. You rummage through your cart and hand him 2 of your driest, least poetic sponges. He holds them like ancient relics. These will do. Do you still accept payment in beetle carvings? You hesitate. He laughs. I jest. Silver, of course. He tosses you a coin and strolls away, speaking softly to his sponge. Historians still argue whether Romans imbued everyday objects with spiritual properties. While most sponges were for hygiene or household use, certain fringes of Roman society, philosophers, mystics, poets, believed in the symbolic power of absorbent materials, to soak up evil, to absorb dreams, or to cleanse the soul. You'd say Decimus is all 3 theories wrapped in a scroll. You finally reach your street just as the lamps are being lit. A soft glow begins to fill the alleys, dancing on walls like polite shadows. Your neighbors are settling into dinner. Someone is playing a flute again. You hope it's not the same person from yesterday. As you unpack the cart, you hear footsteps approach. It's Tullia, the woman who runs the wool-dyeing shop 2 doors down. She has streaks of red dye on her arms and a perpetual smirk. Do you have any of the round ones left? She asks. You raise an eyebrow. For what? Wool dyeing. They make perfect blotting tools, and if I press hard enough, I pretend it's the senator who underpaid me. You find one tucked in the corner of the cart. He'll be flatter by morning. She grins and tosses you 2 figs and a nod. Barter in Rome is fluid, especially between neighbors. As she walks away, you feel a strange contentment settle over you. It's not just the coins in your pouch or the figs in your hand. It's the rhythm of the day, the odd customers, the quiet kindnesses, the shared glances of survival. Your trade isn't glorious, but it touches everything: skin, water, ink, oil, even dreams. You step inside and set your bag down. The room is warm, lit by a small clay lamp and the fading scent of last week's rosemary. You unwrap the figs. One is overripe, the other is perfect. You bite into it as you sit and stretch your legs toward the fire pit. The ache in your back reminds you of every step, every coin, every awkward sponge explanation. You remember the woman who asked if sponges could heal headaches. You said yes, if thrown accurately. You remember Faustus's grateful nod, the angry customer who softened, Claudia's ribbon-wrapped bundle, Decimus whispering to sponge dreams. And somewhere in all of that, you realize you're not just a sponge merchant. You're part therapist, part translator, part dream catcher. You reach for your own sponge, soft, clean, slightly rosemary-scented, and press it to your forehead. Not because it does anything, but because it feels good. Outside, Rome continues its evening hum. Plates clink. Stories rise like steam. Donkeys bray in sleepy defiance. Marcus Aurelius rustles in the yard, making the kind of sound that implies dreams of better figs. You lie back, arms behind your head. You've cleaned, soothed, and supplied an empire. Not bad for a day's work. Dawn doesn't so much arrive as crawl across your windowsill. It brings no grand entrance, just a muted gold light and the usual off-key rooster performing his morning aria. You sit up slowly, every joint clicking in protest, as if your body's demanding overtime pay. The sponge you rested your head on is still slightly damp, and you've somehow left a perfect imprint of your cheek on it, an unintentional self-portrait. You stretch, light the oil lamp, and begin your morning ritual. Today is a supply day, which means leaving the city walls behind and heading to the coast where the sea-born sponges begin their journey. You pack lightly an empty satchel, a small bundle of coins, and 3 dried figs to share with Marcus Aurelius. 2 for you, 1 for him. That's the rule. He seems to know it's a travel day. You find him already waiting tail, swishing ears, alert. You secure the smaller cart lighter and less creaky than the one you use for the city, and tie the satchel with double knots. The road to the coast is long, bumpy, and full of the kind of philosophical thoughts that only come from repetitive movement and sore thighs. As you pass the gates of Rome, the city seems to sigh behind you. Fewer voices, less stone, more sky. The smell of olive trees drifts on the breeze. Cicadas begin their chorus like 1,000 tiny percussionists tuning up for midday. The road is familiar. You've walked it 100 times past small farms, over dry creek beds, around boulders that refuse to move, even for emperors. You greet a shepherd with a nod. He nods back. No words needed. You both understand long walks and stubborn animals. Historians still debate how sponge trade routes were managed in detail. Some records suggest centralized control under imperial officials, while others indicate a more freelance system, merchants like you, navigating a patchwork of family ties, regional markets, and good old-fashioned guesswork. You lean toward the second theory, mostly because you've seen Flavius try to file paperwork. You arrive at the coastal village near midday. Salt clings to the air like a second skin. Boats bob at the dock. Nets hang drying. And there, beneath a crooked awning, is Diodoros, the Greek diver who supplies your raw sponge stock. He's tanned, leathery, and smells permanently of brine and confidence. He greets you with a clap on the shoulder. You look thinner. Business good. Business was good. I spent the profit on this visit. He laughs and waves you toward the storage shed. Inside, baskets of freshly harvested sponges are piled like sea-soaked treasure. You pick through them carefully. Some are too brittle, some too holy. One looks like it tried to pick a fight with a sea urchin and lost. Diodoros watches as you sort. You're pickier than the senator's mistress, he mutters. She pays better, you reply. Eventually, you select a modest bundle, enough to restock without risking mold. Diodoros throws in a couple of odd-shaped ones for fun. One is heart-shaped, the other looks like a very unflattering map of Britannia. You seal the deal with a handshake and 2 coins too shiny to be comfortable. He accepts anyway. You both know sponge money is sponge money. Before you leave, he hands you a sealed amphora. For the bathhouse owner who likes the scented kind. Claudia. He winks. You trudge back to the cart, load your bundle, and share a fig with Marcus Aurelius. He accepts it with the tired grace of someone who walked 5 miles and did not ask to. The return trip is quieter. You take a different route through olive groves past a crumbling shrine over a shallow stream that always seems colder than it should be. You hum to yourself, a lullaby your mother used to sing, something about clouds shaped like goats. Halfway home, you stop near a hillside under a cypress tree and rest. You lie on your back, eyes half-closed, sponge bundle cradled beside you like a child. You think about how sponges are ancient, strange, and essential. They don't sparkle, they don't boast, but they endure, they absorb. You wonder what the world would look like if more people were like sponges, quiet, useful, and a little squishy under pressure. You open one of the bundles and pull out the heart-shaped sponge. You hold it to the sky, silhouetted against the sun. Symbolic, you mutter. Marcus sneezes. Back in the city, you reach your stall just before sundown. Claudia is there, waiting, arms crossed, the faintest smile hiding behind her perfume cloud. I hear you traveled. News travels faster than my donkey. She picks through the sponges like a jeweler examining sapphires. She selects the weird Britannia-shaped one. This one looks like an island in distress. Fitting, she pays you with a jar of rose oil and a poem she says she overheard in the market. You're not sure it rhymes, but it mentions donkeys and the moon, so you take it. You return home in the twilight, hands sore, eyes half closed, heart full. You hang the new sponges to dry and place one near your bed, the heart-shaped one. You tell yourself it's because it's easy to grab, but really, it just makes you smile. Outside, the city settles again. Inside, you fall asleep thinking of the sea, of waves, of something soft pressed against your forehead, carrying away the weight of the day. You wake to rain, not a storm, not a thunderous downpour, just a steady Roman drizzle, soft and stubborn, the kind that turns cobblestones slick and makes donkeys frown dramatically. Marcus Aurelius is already doing his rain routine, standing perfectly still under the overhang, glaring at the sky, like it personally insulted his ancestry. You can't blame him. Rain is bad for business. Wet markets mean fewer people strolling, fewer spontaneous sponge purchases, and more soggy tunics. Still, you don't get days off in the sponge trade, especially not when you just spent a good chunk of your coin restocking. You sigh, pack a half load of your driest sponges wrapped tightly in oilcloth, and set out. Your cart creaks in the rain like an old man stretching too early in the morning. The streets are quieter than usual. A few vendors still brave the open square under makeshift tents and tied-together awnings. You nod to them, rain dripping from your hood. You pass the baker's stall. He's grumpy, but the bread is hot. You trade him a small sponge for a round loaf, still steaming in the center. He tears it in half and gives you a piece. Good for wiping dough bowls, he mutters. You continue down a narrow lane toward your smallest, strangest customer, the scroll shop. It's run by 2 brothers, Lucius and Emilius, who copy and sell scrolls of everything from Plato to poultry recipes. And for reasons still unknown to you, they use your sponges to clean their ink trays. You step inside the dim stall, rain dripping from your sleeves. Lucius greets you with his usual dryness. Thought you'd melt. Only my optimism. He gestures toward a bowl of murky water. We need replacements. Too much soot in the last batch. You hand him 2 medium-sized sponges dyed slightly by contact with Diodorus's seaweed. He doesn't care. He dips one in the water, wrings it with surgical precision, and nods. Acceptable. Emilius leans over from the back. Also one for my wife. She uses it to apply blush. You raise an eyebrow. She knows it came from a fisherman's basket. She says it exfoliates her pride. You collect your coins and step back into the rain, where a rivulet is beginning to form along the street's edge, carrying leaves, dust, and maybe the last of someone's sandal. Historians still argue how versatile sponges were in ancient Rome. You'd argue their main use was improvisation. Need to clean ink sponge. Need to pad your sandals sponge. Need a makeshift pillow on a long cart ride sponge. Need to throw something at a tax collector sponge, ideally wet. You pass a closed bathhouse shuttered for repairs. You peek inside anyway. The owner sees you and waves. Next week, he calls. Bring me one that doesn't shrink in vinegar. You wave back. Bring me vinegar that doesn't shrink sponges. It's a slow day, and you know it. You find a dry alcove under a crumbling archway and sit for a while watching the rain tap quietly against the stones. You share the rest of your bread with Marcus Aurelius, who chews with the energy of someone philosophically opposed to wet weather. A man walks by with a wooden bucket full of eels. He nods solemnly. You nod back. Another passerby asks if you have anything more decorative. You offer him one of the odd-shaped sponges from Diodorus's fun batch. It vaguely resembles the emperor's profile, if you squint and believe in coincidences. He buys it immediately. To hang by the door, he says, for luck. You don't question it. Later, you visit a small shop run by an older woman named Neuratia, who sells herbs and poultices. She trades you thyme bundles for rough-cut sponge ends, which she uses to apply poultices to goats. You didn't know goats needed poultices. You still don't. But you nod respectfully as she wraps them in cloth and murmurs blessings. On your way back, you're flagged down by a pair of children playing in the rain. They ask if they can use a sponge as a toy. You hesitate, then hand them a small, soft one. Within minutes, it becomes a racing boat in a rain gutter. They cheer as it floats. You smile despite the chill, because even on the soggiest, most sales-deficient day, someone's making a memory with a sponge. You arrive home drenched. Your cloak clings like a judgment. Marcus Aurelius takes his usual spot under the overhang and lets out a noise somewhere between a snort and a sigh. You strip off the wet cloth, hang the sponges to dry near the hearth, and place the last loaf crust in your clay bowl. You sit beside it, legs outstretched, steam rising from your damp skin, like some mythological sponge creature just emerged from the sea. You pick up a fresh sponge, unused, still springy, and press it to your cheek. It's cool, soft, grounding. The world outside is soaked, unpredictable, and loud. But in here there is quiet and texture and the slow, steady rhythm of a trade that always waits, always returns, always soaks up the moments no one else notices. The rain doesn't stop. It just changes tempo, from steady percussion to soft tapping, the kind of drizzle that seems like it might end but never really does. You wake in the middle of the night to hear it whispering against the clay tiles of your roof, like it's reciting some secret lullaby in a language only puddles understand. Morning is damp gray and suspiciously quiet. You step outside, wringing your tunic at the waist, and nod to Marcus Aurelius. He looks at you like you're the one responsible for the weather. Maybe you are. Maybe all sponge merchants get blamed when water falls from the sky. Occupational hazard. You load a small batch today, just enough for a few errands and loyal customers. The regular market is a mud pit by now, so you take a different route toward the Scholars District. It's uphill, quieter, and filled with people who spend most of their day thinking about abstract concepts and very little time actually bathing. Perfect. Your first stop is a physician named Curtius. He's one of the strange ones, not unkind, just always a little distracted, like he's trying to remember the square root of Jupiter. He greets you with a nod while examining a patient's ear. Good. You brought more applicators. Technically, they're sea creatures. Perfect. You hand him a bundle of tight, fine-textured sponges. He uses them to clean wounds, apply balms, and once allegedly to remove a grape stem from a consul's nose. You don't ask for details. Do you have the oblong ones, he asks. You pull out 2, limited supply, very popular with people who fall dramatically. He nods solemnly and pays you with a coin and a strip of dried fruit. You're not sure what fruit it once was. You chew it anyway. Historians still argue how much medicine in Rome relied on sponge tools. Some sources describe them as essential implements for minor surgeries. Others suggest they were mostly improvisations used because they were there. You figure it's a bit of both. Sometimes a sponge saves a life. Sometimes it's just there to mop up whatever nearly ended it. You stop at a public fountain to refill your water skin. The water's cold, clean, and slightly metallic. As you sip, a boy nearby drops his amphora. It cracks, splashing water everywhere. He looks horrified. You hand him one of your smaller sponges. For the worst of it, you say. He stares, then grins and sops up the puddle. His mother thanks you with a fig and a nod. You're now up one fruit and down one sponge. Fair trade. Your next delivery is to a tiny shop tucked between two brick arches. A woman named Livia runs it, an engraver of tablets, signposts, and household charms. She uses sponges not for cleaning but for texture dabbing dye onto inscriptions, so the carved words stand out better. She examines your batch. Too soft. Try this one, you offer, handing over a denser piece. She tests it against a wax tablet. The pattern is even controlled, almost beautiful. Perfect, she says, tossing you a coin and a wax-sealed note. What's this? A request. My cousin wants one in the shape of a lion. Of course he does. You tuck the note away. Another custom job. Another afternoon carving damp sea debris into exotic animals. Sponge artistry, your side hustle. You keep walking, basket lighter thoughts drifting. You pass a building being whitewashed, the workers laughing and arguing in equal measure. One of them spots your cart. Hey, got anything for scrubbing marble? You rummage through your scraps and hand over a rough one, still slightly stained from salt. Test it on something you don't care about. First you suggest. He laughs. Like my brother-in-law. Exactly. Coins change hands. You move on. Marcus Aurelius doesn't complain today. He walks with a kind of contented sluggishness, as if the cooler weather suits him. You share a handful of barley with him at the next stop, and he actually looks grateful. You stop by a small temple on the way home, not a grand one, just a roadside shrine to a household god. You've passed it 100 times. Today it's freshly cleaned. Someone's laid rosemary on the step. A priest is crouched nearby arranging offerings. He sees your cart and waves you over. We use sponges during cleansing rituals, he explains. You nod. For the statues. For the walls, the statues bathe in silence. You hand him 3 of your cleanest, purest sponges. He blesses each one before setting them inside the vestibule. As you turn to leave, he adds, they're sacred, you know. They soak the world's mess and leave nothing behind. You smile, so do I on good days. Rain begins again, gentle, rhythmic. You make your way home slowly, the streets slick the city breathing in soft syllables. At your doorstep, you pause. You reach into your basket, pull out one last sponge, and press it against your temple. It's not for cleaning. It's for remembering, for holding the shape of the day, for absorbing something you can't quite name, but that still needs to be held. The next day brings sun again. Not blazing, not punishing, just that perfect Roman kind of sunlight. Warm on your shoulders, dappling the street through crisscrossed laundry lines, bouncing off rooftops, like it's trying to cheer the city up. You step outside with the kind of ease that only follows a rain-drenched day of light work and strange temple metaphors. Marcus Aurelius is already awake, already chewing something hopefully plant-based, possibly decorative. You pretend not to notice. You pack light again, not because you're low on sponges, but because today isn't for selling. Today is for collecting debts. And in the sponge world, that means more than coins. First stop the barber shop near the baker's alley. Publius the barber owes you 3 sponges worth of silver from 2 weeks back. You arrive just as he's finishing a shave on a man who clearly didn't want one. The customer is red-faced, half-shaved, and muttering something about treachery. Publius, you say. He looks up. Ah, Sponge Man. He reaches for a pouch under the counter. I've got your coin. You hold up a hand. Actually, I was hoping for a favor. He squints. What kind? Information. Historians still argue whether barbers were informal newsbrokers. But if you've spent any time in Rome, you know the truth. Barbers know everything. Who's cheating, who's stealing, who's bathing suspiciously often. Publius is no exception. You lean in. What do you know about the man selling dyed sponges in the southern quarter? Publius snorts. Fabius, the forger. You raise an eyebrow. He boils them in crushed berries to make them look rare, claims they're from Gaul. They're from my trash pile. Then he's charging a fortune for your rejects. You sigh. Publius hands you a coin. You want me to spread the word. You nod. Make it known they lose their color when wet. He grins. I'll make sure everyone's embarrassed in front of someone important. Rome's version of justice. You stop next at the bathhouse where Gnaeus works, not to sell but to retrieve a debt of a different kind. 2 weeks ago he borrowed your cartwheel after his broke mid-delivery. You'd forgotten until Marcus Aurelius began limping again. Gnaeus greets you at the back gate. It wobbles a little, but it rolls. He leads you to a small shed where your wheel leans sadly against a barrel. You inspect it, scuffed but usable. You attach it, grateful. He pats Marcus's flank, earning a tail flick. You want a bath? He asks, on the house. You hesitate. A merchant bathing at midday scandalous. You shrug. I won't tell if you don't. The water is warm, the sponge they give you oddly familiar, and for one glorious hour you're the cleanest you've been in weeks. You sit in the steam, listening to distant chatter and the slosh of buckets, and let the heat settle into your bones. You dry off, toss the borrowed sponge into the reuse bucket. You try not to think about it and leave feeling like a slightly more civilized animal. Next stop, the apothecary. Lucan, as always, is brewing something questionable. His shop smells of vinegar and ambition. I owe you 2 for last week, he says without prompting. You nod. And maybe an explanation for this smell. Experimenting with basil and smoke. For what? Romantic clarity. You blink. How's that going? My assistant eloped. Seems effective. He hands you a jar of infused oil as payment. For Claudia, she'll like it. You tuck it into your bag, wondering how many relationships you've accidentally influenced via sponge adjacency. You pass through the central square on your way home. There, at the edge of the crowd, stands Fabius the forger, hawking his rainbow sponges to a group of confused tourists. You approach quietly, stand at the edge of his stall, and wait. He notices, freezes. Hello, colleague. You say nothing. He gestures at a bright blue sponge. From Gaul. Very rare. Holds scent for days. You lean in. Dyes the water purple. Ask your last 3 customers. He blinks. You smile. Return the rest, or I start telling bathhouses they turn your skin green. He hesitates. You add, and the priests. He swallows hard. I'll return them tomorrow. You nod. Today. He sighs and pulls a bundle from under the table. You recognize your rejects. You take them without another word. Justice Roman edition, petty public, slightly soggy. Back home you spread the returned sponges to dry. Some are salvageable. Most are stained beyond hope. Still you'll find uses. Dye testers, cleaning tools, temple offerings, or gifts to people you don't like. You sit on your stool, sip watered wine, and stare at the wall. You think about how many places you've been today, how many conversations sponges have opened. You're not just a seller, you're a fixer, a negotiator, a kind of soft-handed diplomat, all through these little creatures of the sea. You pick one up, ruined, lopsided, vaguely pink. You squeeze it. It squeaks. You smile. You might keep this one. You wake before sunrise the next morning, stirred not by noise or light, but by a smell smoke. Not the sharp panic of fire, but the softer kind, bread ovens firing early. someone burning olive pits for heat, and the faint edge of charcoal scribes warming their ink. Rome is beginning another day, and you sponge merchant that you are already 10 steps behind. You yawn, stretch, and shuffle outside. Marcus Aurelius is unbothered, chewing on straw like a philosopher mulling over his latest paradox. The sky is still violet pale at the edges. A beautiful hour, if it weren't so cold on your toes. Today is paperwork day. You groan. The Roman Empire does not run on aqueducts and marble alone. It runs on records, scribes, permits, and tax ledgers written by people who believe that every merchant should suffer in triplicate. And so today, you head not to bathhouses or scholars, but to the Officium Vectigalis, the local tax office. It's a place filled with wax tablets, scroll racks, and the souls of 100 overworked scribes who smell faintly of ink, regret, and fennel tea. You bundle a few sponge samples, always good to bring gifts, and begin the trudge through Rome's bureaucratic underbelly. The office is tucked between a dye shop and a silversmith, up a narrow staircase that creaks with each self-important step. You knock. The door opens a few heartbeats later, revealing a young man whose tunic is too clean to trust. Name. You state it. Trade. Sponge merchant. He winces again. Every month, you're shown to a bench where a wax tablet waits. It lists your known clients' declared quantities and something called a saturation coefficient, which even the gods don't understand. Licinius, your least favorite tax inspector, appears moments later. He's wearing a new cloak clearly financed by confiscated fennel or ill-gotten goat hair. He sits across from you, tapping a stylus against his teeth like a villain in a comedy. Let's review, he says, opening your ledger. You lean forward. We could also not. He doesn't laugh. You walk through the usual dance. How many sponges sold to whom, at what price, for what purpose? You suspect he's making half of it up. You know you're doing the same. At one point he asks about your divinational exports. What exports? Someone in the temple claims you sell sponges for prophecy. I sell them for cleaning altars. Same thing. Not to my accountant. Licinius sighs, scribbles something, and waves you off. You'll owe 3 denarii. I brought you a sponge. He pauses. The soft kind. The kind that makes even tax feel absorbable. He takes it, sniffs it, pockets it. 2 denarii. Progress. As you leave, you pass another merchant pottery, by the look of her, sitting on the bench, head in her hands. You nod in sympathy. She nods back. Outside, the sunlight is friendlier, warmer. You breathe it in like soup. You walk toward the forum, thinking you'll drop off a few samples to a wine shop, whose owner occasionally uses sponges to plug leaking amphorae. Not elegant, but functional. Along the way, you pass a boy selling birds in cages. He holds one up and calls tweeting augury available cheap luck. You raise an eyebrow. Do you take trades? He considers. Only if it's not a goose. You give him a sponge shaped like a star. He hands you a feather, in case you need to write poetry. You won't. But it's nice to be offered. At the wine shop, the owner, a man named Balbus with a permanent wine stain across his chest, greets you with a burp and a half-hearted wave. You got the plugs. You hand him a bundle of rough, dense sponges. He sniffs one. Still better than cork. He pays in small coins and a cup of something you hope is diluted wine. You drink it anyway. It tastes like ambition and old grapes. Historians still argue how many tradesmen supplemented their main business with minor services. You know from experience everyone's got a side hustle. Sponge sellers trade in feathers. Wine merchants plug leaks with bath tools. Bureaucrats trade tax leniency for slightly scented bribes. You stop at the public notice board on the way home. Someone's posted a request, looking for soft cleaning implements. No goats, please. You jot down the address. You'll visit them tomorrow. At home, you lay your coins on the table. Fewer than yesterday, but not by much. You light your small lamp, boil a pot of lentils, and settle into the chair that creaks like an old friend every time you exhale. You reach into your sack and pull out a sponge, not for use, just to hold, to fiddle with, to press gently between your fingers like a stress ball invented before stress was a diagnosable condition. You think about your week, the walk to the coast, the scholar whispering to his sponges, the boy racing one down a rain gutter. You think about your rivals, your clients, your cousin Flavius probably plotting another sponge-shaped scheme. You think about how a sponge, one of nature's strangest gifts, can carry so much water, ink, wine, frustration, even a bit of hope. You smile, and in the glow of your lamp, the sponge glistens just slightly like it too remembers. You spend the next morning restocking shelves. Well, shelf singular. Your home isn't a shop, not officially. But over the years, you've collected a neat little system of baskets, hooks, and clay jars that would make any passing merchant nod in approval. You arrange your sponge inventory with care, rough ones to the left, soft ones in the middle, oddly shaped ones up top, for specialty requests and occasional amusement. Today, you have a new mission. A rare request came in via that scroll shop you passed yesterday. Someone wants paint sponges. You're intrigued. You've sold to painters before, usually for cleaning brushes or daubing pigments, but this order is specific. A collection of varied densities cut flat on one side, suitable for mural blending. Fancy. You load a satchel with samples and head toward the artisan quarter, past pottery vendors, woodworkers, jewelers, and one particularly intense man sculpting a bust of Minerva with a nose slightly too sharp. It smells like sawdust and ambition. The painter, it turns out, is a woman named Dextra, working on a commission for a nobleman's dining room. The mural Neptune rising from the sea on the back of a dolphin that looks like it might have once been a horse. She wipes her hands on a cloth and eyes your basket. Let me guess, soft, softer, and why is it wet? You smile. That's the premium tier. She laughs and starts testing, dabbing, twisting, blotting colors on a slab of wood. One sponge leaves perfect stipples, another smears ochre like a sunrise. This one's divine, she mutters. Sea-born, you say. She looks up. Aren't we all? You leave with a few coins, a small paint blotch on your forearm, and a sense of pride. Not everyone's sponge ends up in a painting. Yours might. Next, you detour to the Subura. You don't go often, too crowded, too loud, too much potential for stepping in something regrettable. But today's different. You promised a friend you'd visit. Gaius is a retired sponge merchant, now mostly blind, mostly deaf, and wholly opinionated. He lives above a cobbler and claims to have once sold a sponge to Caesar's cook. You're 80% sure he's lying, but you admire the dedication. You knock. A muffled voice shouts, "I'm still here," followed by the scraping of furniture. He opens the door in a tunic that may have been white 2 decades ago. You brought it. You hand him a small, firm sponge, his favorite kind. He runs his fingers over the surface like it's a familiar face. Good shape, he mutters, springy, honest. You sit while he boils water for tea, which tastes like boiled optimism and mystery leaves. He talks for a while about the old days, about sponges that were twice as thick and half as proud, about a donkey he once owned that bit a senator. You listen. That's all he really wants. Before you leave, he presses something into your hand, a tiny carved sponge made of wood no bigger than your thumb. Made it myself, he says, for when your hands are empty. You thank him and walk back toward the city center, feeling the weight of his memory tucked safely in your pouch. Historians still debate how much oral tradition shaped the trades of Rome. There are scrolls, of course, plenty of records, but the real knowledge that lived in hands, in habits, in the stories told over bad tea and better silence. By mid-afternoon, you've returned to your usual route. You check in with Claudia, deliver another batch to the scroll shop. They're using sponges now to pat dust off scrolls, innovative, and dodge a group of toga-clad teenagers attempting to juggle with amphora stoppers. One falls. No one is surprised. Then a surprise. A woman approaches your cart as you're adjusting the load. She's elegant hair pinned with ivory sticks, tunic neatly belted, eyes sharp. "You're the one who sold my daughter a fish sponge," she says. You brace. She's obsessed with it. You exhale. She now wants an entire menagerie. You blink. Animals. Sponges in the shape of animals, fish, turtles, maybe a lion. You nod slowly. Creative bath time. She won't bathe without them. You smile. "Then I suppose we start a zoo." She orders 6 and pays in advance. Include a phoenix if you can manage. You accept the challenge. As the sun begins to lean westward, you make your way back home. The alley is quiet, your neighbors nodding their greetings. You step inside, lay your pouch on the table, and pull out the tiny wooden sponge Gaius gave you. You place it on the shelf above your door, your first shrine to your trade. Just a carved piece of wood. But it means something. The day ends like most do, quietly. You cook lentils, sip weak wine, and scrub a stain from your sleeve with a sponge that's done its share. You sit by the fire, feet up, shoulders sore. You stare at the little wooden sponge, and for a moment everything feels right. Soft, absorbent, and entirely your own. It begins with a knock, not the hesitant knock of a customer or the bored knock of a neighbor needing a favor. No, this is a purposeful knock, the kind of knock that means someone has brought scrolls, possibly with signatures. You open the door to find a well-dressed man holding a rolled parchment and wearing an expression halfway between smugness and indigestion. "Are you the sponge seller?" he asks, as if he already resents the answer. You nod slowly. "I suppose I am." He unrolls the parchment with flair. "I come on behalf of Decimus Fulvius, third cousin to the wife of Senator Hortensius. You are hereby summoned to present your finest goods for consideration as suppliers to the household bathing chambers." You blink. "You want me to audition?" "My sponges." He pauses. "Yes." You consider closing the door, but curiosity outweighs dignity when, "Now," you sigh. Marcus Aurelius, sensing tension, flicks his ears but otherwise continues chewing something indeterminate and possibly not plant-based. You gather your softest, smoothest, most symmetrical specimens and wrap them carefully in linen. Decorative ties, a little oil to bring out the natural texture, basically a sponge catwalk presentation. The senator's home is located in the Palatine district, where homes aren't just houses, they're architectural bragging rights. Mosaic-tiled thresholds, marble columns, peacocks glaring from shaded gardens. You do not belong here. Your sandals squeak as you walk past polished servants and bored guards. You're led to an open courtyard where 2 people await a steward, with ink-stained fingers and an older woman you recognize from the market as the one who asked if sponge colors reflect moral alignment. She greets you with a nod. "You're the one with the moon-dried batch." You nod back. "And sun-dried, dew-dried, and hope-dried." She smiles. "Let's begin." What follows is possibly the strangest 20 minutes of your professional life. You present each sponge like a rare jewel. You describe texture, absorption rate, durability. You even squeeze one slowly for effect. The steward scribbles furiously while muttering pliability noted under his breath. At one point, you're asked which sponge would best accompany a late-night, perfumed bath after attending the theater. You suggest the medium-grade one with lavender undertones. The steward nods approvingly. Historians still argue whether Roman elites were this excessive in their hygiene rituals. But when you're in a courtyard surrounded by perfumed plants talking sponge texture, with people wearing more gold than fabric, you stop arguing and start selling. You leave with a promise they'll deliberate and contact you with the outcome. You resist the urge to say they're sponges, not senators. Back on the street, you exhale deeply. You've sold to scholars, priests, perfumers, painters, and pirates, but this is new. You find a quiet step near the theater site and share a plum with Marcus Aurelius. He accepts it as though it were owed to him by divine right. Across the street, a woman sells sweetened nuts wrapped in leaves. You trade her a cleaning sponge for a small pouch. She grins. You scrub my jars, I sweeten your day. Deal. You stroll through the neighborhood, letting the afternoon unfold. A boy runs past with a wooden sword. A girl follows shouting about curses. A poet nearby recites loudly to no one, gesturing with an empty cup. And then, like a gift from the sponge gods themselves, you spot her. Claudia, standing in front of her perfumery, holding something. A sponge. Not just any sponge. Your sponge. Decorated. Painted. She's displaying it on a small pedestal near her window, wrapped in ribbon nestled beside a jar of rose oil. She sees you and waves you over. I've discovered a new use, she says. You're exfoliating statues now. Better. I'm offering scented sponge bundles for romantic gifts. You blink. Romantic. Sponge bundles. She nods. Soft, scented, symbolic. They say, I want you clean but tenderly. You're halfway between laughter and admiration. I'm naming the line after you, she adds. You choke on a nut. Really? Well, the idea of you, the mysterious sponge merchant. I'm calling it the Aurelius Collection. You glance at your donkey. He stares back. You don't argue. Back home, you unload your cart, slowly smiling to yourself. You pull the test sponges from the senator's visit and place them back into storage. They'll probably never call. Or maybe they will. Either way, you'll survive. You sit at your workbench and pick up a half-dried specimen, one with a little notch in the side and a slightly crooked profile. Not perfect, but honest. You dip it in warm water, wring it out, and place it beside your lamp. You think of Gaius, of Claudia, of the senator's courtyard, of sponges not as tools but as bridges, between people, between work and wonder, between the mundane and the oddly magical. You eat another plum, and the city now steeped in twilight exhales. Just like you, there's a saying among Rome's quieter tradesmen, when things are too calm, expect someone to start a festival. And sure enough, you wake the next morning to the sound of drums. Distant at first, then closer, then absurdly close, like someone's playing cymbals directly outside your window, because someone is. A small parade of painted musicians marches past, followed by dancers with ribbons and what appears to be a man wearing a goat costume. You watch from the doorway, a half-eaten fig in one hand and your usual sense of dread in the other. Marcus Aurelius predictably wants no part of it. He retreats behind your storage crate and glares at the procession like it's a personal betrayal. You sigh. It's festival day, which in sponge merchant terms means one of two things: wildly increased sales from travelers needing last-minute cleaning supplies, or absolute chaos, depending on how many wine vendors set up shop too close to the civic fountain. You decide to roll the dice. You load a modest cart, medium sponges, decorative ones, and a small bundle of novelty items, heart-shaped, fish-shaped, and one suspiciously resembling Mars's helmet. Someone always asks. The forum is already packed. Banners ripple from archways, children chase one another with painted sticks, and poets stand on crates reciting verses no one asked for. You set up your stall near the edge, sandwiched between a cheese seller and a woman selling novelty togas with humorous slogans stitched in red thread. One reads, "Clean body, dubious mind." You consider buying it. A man with gold rings and a peacock feather in his hair approaches first. "I need something soft," he says, "but not too soft." You hand him a mid-range option. He presses it thoughtfully to his cheek. It's like kissing a philosophical frog. You nod. All sales final. He buys two. Next comes a group of foreign visitors, Egyptians, by the look of their linen robes, who browse in silence. One selects a rough sponge and asks, "Battle sponge." You consider, only metaphorically. He laughs and buys four. A baker's assistant runs by mid-sale, dusted in flour, clutching a loaf like it's stolen gold. Behind him, a dog chases with enthusiastic authority. You step out of the way just in time. The noise grows. Drums, flutes, arguments. Somewhere nearby, a mime is pretending to be a statue, holding an invisible sponge. You're flattered. Slightly. Then the contest begins, an impromptu event announced by a man in a leopard print tunic, standing on a barrel. Cleanest object challenge, he bellows. Winner gets a jug of wine. Participants appear instantly. One woman offers a polished apple. A child holds up a freshly washed sandal. A man raises a goat. You naturally step forward with a sponge so pristine it might blind Jupiter. Gasps, whispers, judgmental humming. The man in leopard print eyes it. What is this? You deadpan the soul of cleanliness. He sniffs it. Smells like vinegar and ambition. You win. They hand you the jug of wine, strong, probably illegal, and delicious. Historians still argue whether merchants were allowed to participate in public games and contests. But on festival days, the rules blur like ink in a rainstorm. One moment you're a tradesman. The next, you're a champion of sanitation. The day wears on. You sell out of decorative sponges. Even the Mars helmet one goes to a boy who insists it's a spaceship. You don't argue. You pass Claudia around midday. She's carrying a basket of rose-wrapped sponge bundles, smiling like a woman whose scent empire just conquered another quadrant of the city. You win anything she asks? A jug of questionable wine. She grins. Use it to disinfect your pride. By late afternoon, the crowd shifts from festive to exuberant. Music blares louder. Someone juggles lit torches. A minor scuffle breaks out between two vendors, arguing over whose amphora is more symbolic. You begin pecking up. That's when you see him, Faustus, holding a crate of what he claims are imported Gaulish cloud sponges dyed pastel colors and wrapped in ribbons. You approach casually, selling dreams again. He grins, selling what sells. You inspect one. That's goat wool. He shrugs. Only on the outside. You shake your head and trade him a real sponge for one of his ridiculous fakes. Consider it a mercy swap. He winks. See you at Saturnalia. You trudge home with an empty cart, sore shoulders, wine jug under one arm, and a pastel goat wool sponge in your bag, a reminder that honesty in your trade is rare and vaguely scented. Back home, Marcus Aurelius is lounging like a statue. You toss him the end of a dried fig. He yawns, unimpressed. You wash your hands, rinse your face with warm water, and pour a little wine into a chipped clay cup. You sit at the doorway and watch the last of the festival wind down, the trailing notes of flutes, the shimmer of dropped ribbons, the occasional shout followed by laughter. You sip, you sigh, you look at your hand. Still smells like vinegar and ambition. You smile, because in a city filled with banners, poets, jugglers, and goat displays, you humble sponge merchant were the one who walked home with the wine. The morning after a festival always feels like Rome itself is hungover. The streets are littered with wilted garlands, flattened fig cakes, and one sandal of mysterious origin. A vendor nearby is sweeping glitter from his doorstep with the resignation of someone who just learned glitter is forever. You step over two collapsed paper masks and nod to a passing water carrier who looks like he hasn't blinked since sunset. Marcus Aurelius, to his credit, seems refreshed. He trots ahead of the cart today with more energy than usual, no doubt due to the stolen sweetbread you found tucked in the hay pile. Today is for repairs. Not glamorous, not profitable, just necessary. Your sponge stock is low and your cart's left wheel has developed a concerning squeak that Marcus glances at every few minutes like he's preparing to file a formal complaint. Your first stop is the carpenter's workshop near the tanner's district. The air smells of sawdust and boiled hide, a bold combination. You nod to the apprentice sanding a chair leg with excessive determination and head inside. "Cartwheel?" the carpenter asks, not looking up. You nod. "Same one, same one." He sighs, gestures toward a stack of spokeless frames and mutters, Maybe stop hauling your whole empire every morning. You smile. What would you do without me? He raises an eyebrow. Sleep more. Breathe less sponge dust. You leave the wheel with him and promise to return by dusk. In exchange, you hand over a sponge with one flat edge perfect for smoothing wax. He acts unimpressed but tucks it into his tool apron with a practiced hand. Next on your list is a visit to a woman named Vibiana, a weaver who once traded you 3 fine linen wrappings in exchange for a sponge with personality. You're not sure what that meant, but she was delighted. Now she wants more. You find her in her shop, surrounded by threads in every possible shade of earth. She's combing out a bolt of wool and humming a tune that may or may not be about goats. You brought them. You hand her a bundle, 3 sponges, one dense, one soft, one star-shaped. She picks up the star. This one feels joyful. It's for drying children. She nods solemnly as if you've said something profound. I'm sewing them into washing gloves. You blink, as in permanently. Yes, that way you never forget. Historians still argue whether sponge-integrated garments existed or whether this was just a Vibiana original. You make a mental note to watch how it sells. She hands you a small wrapped parcel in return for your donkey. You open it to find a thick cloth bridle strap embroidered with tiny fish. Marcus Aurelius is going to hate how much he loves it. You detour past the Temple of Fortuna on your way home. Not to worship, though you toss a coin out of habit, but to drop off a special delivery. The high priest requested ritual-grade purification sponges, which you assume means very clean. You're met by a young acolyte no older than 14 who greets you like he's been preparing for this moment his whole life. Are these the sacred ones? You nod. Dried in moonlight, bathed in rosemary, and never touched by sarcasm. He doesn't get the joke, which makes it even better. He disappears into the inner chamber and returns with a stamped wax seal and a token of gratitude, a palm-sized votive tablet with your name spelled incorrectly scratched into it. You don't correct him. It's charming. As you wander back toward your route, you pass a group of older men arguing about public fountains. One gestures wildly with a dripping sponge as evidence of poor plumbing. You smile. You consider offering your professional opinion, but decide they're having too much fun. At midday, you pick up your repaired wheel, now greased, balanced, and suspiciously better than it was before. The carpenter waves off your offer of coin and instead asks for 2 of those weird decorative ones my niece keeps talking about. You give him a heart and a turtle. He grins like a child who just discovered pudding. You stop by the river on your way home, mostly out of habit. The water flows gently today, the Tiber calm after the city's recent chaos. You sit near the bank, pulling a sponge from your bag and dipping it into the cool current. It absorbs silently, effortlessly. You wring it out. Repeat. You think about how this tiny, porous thing has brought you into homes, temples, bathhouses, scandals, and festivals. You think about how each one carries a trace of the place it came from. Salt dye, perfume, sweat ink. You wonder how many hands your sponges have touched, how many stories they've cleaned up, or maybe started. Back at home, you feed Marcus Aurelius and fasten the new bridle around his neck. He stiffens in theatrical horror, then walks in a perfect circle to show it off. You light your lamp, wash your hands, and sit with your tools. There's a half-carved sponge animal still waiting a phoenix. The customer hasn't come back, but you work on it anyway. Because someone will. They always do. And when they do, you'll be ready with hands that remember the shape of the sea and shelves that never stay full for long. It's quiet this morning, a kind of hush that settles over the city after several days of relentless sound. You wake to birdsong and the creak of a cart in the distance, not yours for once. You sit up slowly, expecting the usual ache, but find yourself oddly rested. Maybe it's the new cushion. Maybe it's the knowledge that today is inventory day. Now that may not sound exciting to the untrained ear, but to a sponge merchant, inventory day is part meditation, part archaeology and part comedy routine, because you always find something strange, squishy, or suspicious that you have no memory of acquiring. You start by laying everything out. The good sponges, smooth, sun-dried, properly sorted. The not-so-good, uneven, stiff one with a suspicious ink stain, shaped exactly like the province of Sicilia. The novelty pile, turtle star, Mars helmet, and the phoenix still half-carved. You place it gently on the work table. You'll finish it today. Probably. You take stock of string vinegar wrapping cloths and decorative ties. You're down to your last roll of the nice ribbon, the one Claudia insists makes her romantic bundles irresistible. You make a note to visit the thread vendor near the dye vats. He owes you for that time you saved his loom from a soap fire. Long story. Marcus Aurelius lounges beside the door, eyes closed, ears twitching, every time you sneeze from the dust rising off old sponge crates. He only opens his eyes when you hold up a particularly odd specimen, a sponge dyed bright red cut into a square and wrapped with a note. You open the note. It reads, "For your worst customer, may they sit on it." You laugh. You'd forgotten Claudia gave you that one after the senator's wife sent back a batch for being too common. You tuck it into a drawer labeled emergency humor. Midway through your organizing, a knock comes at the door. A boy stands there, barely 10, holding a coin and looking uncertain. Mom says I can pick one. You blink. One sponge. He nods. She said I could have the weirdest one. You invite him in. He browses like he's choosing a sword. Eventually he picks the Mars helmet. You raise an eyebrow. For battle. For bathing. Wise. He hands over the coin and leaves grinning. You watch him run off helmet sponge clutched like a trophy. You finish your sorting before noon. The shelves look tidy, the crates are labeled, and your workbench actually has space. You treat yourself to a slice of bread, a smear of cheese, and the last fig. You even light a sprig of rosemary near the window. That's when the letter arrives, delivered by a servant who doesn't wait, just drops it and vanishes. The parchment is high quality. The seal is a stylized bathhouse symbol with a senator's crest woven in. You open it. It's an invitation. Your services have been selected for trial within the estate of Senator Hortensius. A formal demonstration is required tomorrow. Bring your finest. You laugh once, soft surprised. You weren't expecting them to follow through. You immediately get to work. You select 4 sponges each, unique. One soft as morning light, one with just enough grit for imperial exfoliation, one shaped like a laurel leaf, and the phoenix. You finish carving it with slow care, etching each line until it seems to rise out of your hand. You wrap them in cloth, mark them with color-coded threads, and place them in your finest delivery basket. You know, tomorrow's not just about sponges. It's about you, your trade, your craft, your right to stand in the marble corridors of Rome and say, "This strange, soft thing, I made it matter." You spend the rest of the day in small errands. The ribbon vendor gives you 3 rolls in exchange for a cleaning sponge and a whispered tip about a senator's favorite perfume. You pass Gaius's window and wave. He's asleep, smiling, a sponge on his lap like a pet. You stop by Claudia's for advice, and she kisses your cheek for luck. Back home, you lay out your tunic clean if faded, and polish your delivery crate with a bit of oil and one of the rough sponges you've retired from sales. It's quiet again. The city rests, prepares, and so do you. Tomorrow you step into the villa of a man who thinks dignity is measured in marble tiles. You'll show him it's also found in sea foam, in porosity, in the softness that outlasts stone. You blow out your lamp and sleep fingers still slightly scented from the rosemary you tied around the phoenix. The morning of your demonstration begins with you double-knotting your sandal straps and whispering to Marcus Aurelius, "Try not to embarrass me." He responds by sneezing on the wheel. You accept this as a blessing. The cart is lighter today, just the demonstration crate polished to a shine, and a second basket with samples in case the senator's wife has opinions. You dress in your best tunic, the one with only 2 patchwork repairs, and 1 unidentifiable stain that looks vaguely philosophical. The streets are still waking up as you pass through. Bakers call out the first loaves children trail, after pigeons with military discipline, and the forum is unusually quiet. Even the statue of Minerva looks less judgmental today. That feels like a good sign. You arrive at the villa just before mid-morning. It looms like a palace with guards out front and a doorman whose job is mostly to look unimpressed. You're led through 2 courtyards, 1 colonnade, and a room where someone is playing a harp, or possibly attempting to strangle a lyre. The steward from before, same ink-stained fingers, same expression of administrative pain, meets you near the baths. "This way," he says, "and no jokes about soap. Never crossed my mind, you lie." The bathhouse is magnificent. Marble floors, heated walls, steam rooms that smell like citrus and something too expensive to name. And waiting in the main chamber is Senator Hortensius himself, wrapped in a towel with more embroidery than your entire wardrobe. Beside him stands his wife, graceful, unreadable already mid-sigh. "You set your crate down gently," the steward says. "You start with the basics. The sea origin, the harvesting process, the curing rituals. You embellish a bit, moonlight's mentioned again. You present the softest sponge, then the exfoliator. You demonstrate their texture, their hold of scented oil, their resilience in warm water." The senator nods politely. His wife squints. Then you reveal the phoenix. Carved, delicately wrapped in a silk cloth, it rests in your hands like an offering. The senator leans forward. Symbolism, resilience, renewal, cleanliness rising from ashes. His wife steps closer, takes it, turns it over. "It's lovely," she says. "Odd, but lovely." You pause. It can be scented to preference. She holds it near her nose. "Lavender and mint." "Noted." They whisper together. The steward writes something. Then miraculously the senator says, "We'll try them for a month. If they please us, you'll supply our private baths." You nod calmly. Internally you scream. You bow, collect your samples. Except the phoenix, they keep that one and are escorted out with the kind of speed reserved for couriers and unwanted relatives. Once outside, you exhale. Deeply. You look at Marcus Aurelius. "We're in," you whisper. He blinks. You reward him with a fig. You spend the rest of the day floating through the city. You stop by Claudia's and tell her the news. She claps, hands you a sachet of jasmine and says, "Don't get arrogant, but do get new shoes." You pass the scroll shop. They already know. The baths. Really, one of the brothers says, "Try not to price us out of exfoliation." You visit Gaius. He's awake today, sipping something murky. "They liked the phoenix," he croaks. "They loved it." He nods. Knew they would. Never trust clean people with no imagination. At home, you tuck away your earnings, polish your table, and set 1 clean sponge near the window. Not for use, just as a reminder. That night, you sit on your doorstep and watch the stars appear one by one. The city is humming soft content full of half-finished stories and people like you who find dignity in the overlooked. You think about your first delivery, the first bathhouse, the first sponge that fell apart mid-sale. And now, a villa, a senator, a phoenix. You smile, because tomorrow the work continues. Not because you need the coins, but because in a world of marble facades and silver tongues, someone still needs to carry the quiet things, the humble things, the sponges. The days that follow are different, not louder, not grander, but touched with a new kind of rhythm. Orders begin to flow in. At first, it's just the senator's steward requesting 5 more phoenixes, 3 with fur oil, 2 unscented. Then a perfumer in the Aventine wants decorative sponge appliques for her jars. And soon, without warning, you find yourself mentioned by name in a market vendor's pitch. Like the sponge merchant for Senator Hortensius uses, you try not to smile when you hear it. You fail. But with recognition comes pressure. You're up earlier now. You check your stock with sharper eyes. You study textures more carefully. You slice with a steadier hand. And in the process, you begin to notice something else. Your craft is changing. You're no longer just selling softness. You're shaping meaning. A sponge used to be something for scrubbing mud off sandals. Now it's a symbol of luxury, of care, of Rome's strange and growing obsession with refinement. And yet, the essence remains. One morning, as you're working quietly in your shop, a knock comes. A woman elderly, wrapped in wool, with fingers like bent reeds. "I was told you sell soft things," she says. You nod. "I don't need a bath sponge. I need one for my husband's joints." She explains he's old, sore, doesn't leave bed much, but he misses the feel of the sea. He once sailed. Now he just remembers. You don't hesitate. You select a sponge, not by shape or price, but by feel. A deep sea piece, slightly heavier, full-bodied. You soak it in warm water, wrap it in linen, and hand it to her without charge. When she leaves, she grips it like a blessing. Later that week, she returns not to buy, just to say thank you. Her husband cried when he held it, said it felt like the tide. She whispers. You nod. Some things go beyond coin. That night, you stay late in the workshop, not carving, not counting, just sitting, pressing your fingers into the cool, damp sponges, thinking of ships of age of memory embedded in the porous texture of sea creatures turned companions. Marcus Aurelius nuzzles your leg. You hand him the last fig. You start experimenting again, cutting new shapes, blending oils, pressing thin sponges between fabrics to create layers of scent. You send a few to Claudia. She returns them 2 days later in a woven box labeled for lovers who don't mind a little moisture. You hear from the temple again. The high priest requests ceremonial sponges dyed in gold leaf. You laugh at the absurdity. You make them anyway. You walk through the forum one morning and see a child skipping with a sponge tied to a stick, waving it like a flag. She calls it her cloud sword. You offer her a second one shaped like a star. She runs off screaming joy. Not all days are perfect. A shipment molds in the rain. A noble complains that her sponge is too introspective. Someone tries to copy your phoenix design. You don't mind. Let them try. One evening you visit Gaius with a special gift, a miniature phoenix sponge carved from a rare batch. He holds it like a relic, eyes misting. I taught you nothing, he says. You taught me everything, you reply. He smiles and places it beside his wooden one. As summer deepens, your days stretch with purpose. You're not wealthy, not famous, but you're known. Trusted, the sponge merchant with strange shapes and strange stories. And at night, when the city softens into that velvet kind of quiet, you light your small oil lamp, clean your bench, and press one sponge against your temple. The coolness grounds you. The texture reminds you that even in a world of emperors and intrigue, someone has to hold the soft things. Someone has to care for what absorbs. Because sponges, like stories, like people, are defined not just by what they are, but by what they carry. And you carry them all. Wind down 300 words. The city rests now. The lamps are low. The fountains murmur softly. Somewhere a cat weaves through shadowed alleys and a shutter creaks in the breeze. Rome exhales not with the roar of glory or the clash of empires, but with the quiet settling of dust, of cloth, of breath. You're home. The door is closed. The night wraps around you like linen warmed by fire. The sponge, still slightly damp from today's work, sits on the windowsill, catching the silver glint of moonlight. It doesn't need to shine. It simply is a reminder of things held, things past, things softened. Your body remembers the day, the cart's rhythm, the curve of streets, the pressure of coins, the laughter of strangers, the smell of salt and fig and rosemary. It all lingers gently like the imprint of a hand on clay. And now it slips away. With each breath, the noise fades. With each blink, the shapes blur. With each heartbeat, you descend slowly, safely into the hush beneath the city, where marble becomes sand, where names melt into silence, where even the emperor dreams of oceans and a merchant sleeps beside a donkey beneath a roof of tiles and stars. Let the sponges rest. Let the stories settle. You've done enough. Close your eyes. Feel the softness return. Let yourself be held, carried, and slowly, quietly absorbed by sleep.